Hi guys, today's lesson is all about composition. Now, there's no real sort of easy way through this. There's a lot of things to talk about, but I'm going to try to keep it really kind of condensed. It's going to be a little bit free form, but there'll be a few ideas in there hopefully, which might guide your thinking or help you understand a few ideas about what composition is. So a little bit of background. When I was doing my degree, I sort of fell out of love with guitar a bit and decided that actually I preferred writing. I was really into jazz, but the kind of jazz that I was into was Weather Report or Mahavishnu, the sort of more composed, or even even things like symphonic jazz. I was kind of more into that. So I really liked the harmony of jazz, and I really liked improvising. I thought improvising was really fun, but ultimately I liked the way a certain chord sounded at a certain moment, or the way I felt shivered at a certain change in rhythm or something like that. So it was really kind of my own feelings towards listening to music that led me down a path which would eventually lead to me finishing my PhD in classical composition, which was part portfolio based. So in that period I did a fair amount of writing music in abstract and writing art music essentially, so music that had no commercial purpose. So what I won't be talking about today is anything that's kind of like library music or writing for film or whatever, but a lot of these strategies are sort of cross-compatible, although there are so many more considerations to take into account. So I'll just be talking about composition, like it's this abstract idea, and what we're just trying to do is to write. So the first thing I'll say is that it takes a long time for me to write music. And part of that time is just reflection on the artwork itself. So ideally you want to be looking at finishing something, like or close to finishing, and then leave it for a little bit and look at it later. That's a really good way to make those kind of final improvements, because you start looking at your work more dispassionately because you're not so inside it. And that leads me on to this idea of sketching. So when or many of the famous artists, the visual artists in the world, will produce sketch upon sketch upon sketch until they have the composition right, and then they commit it to a final version. Obviously not everyone does that, and it's the same with music. Some people are more comfortable at sort of producing these things that are more akin to unfinished rough sketches as their final things, and there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes the art is really going, that's finished. If you walk around a gallery, you might see that there's a sort of displayed artwork of things that almost don't look finished, things where, I don't want to use the word coloured in, but some of it's been neglected, if you like, and that's the composition finished. It can get no better, it's fine. But by and large, you look at even someone like Picasso, and if you look at a Picasso exhibition, you see that there are many versions sometimes of the same idea, and then there is kind of one that is most kind of crystalline and complete. We want to be maybe thinking about doing that with our music, and I think one of the problems is that with Logic Pro you kind of have this blank canvas that you're looking at, and you put it in and it sounds really great to begin with, and then you get attached to it and you start adding things to it, and you start building upon something that wasn't really that well conceived. Often it's better to just start again, review things like, is this the right tempo now everything is in? Is this the right form now that everything is in? Is there any way I can strip back stuff at the beginning now that I can see what it's building to? Now that I know, from the sketch process what the final is going to be like, are there any other changes I want to make? And by that point at the end, the whole thing is so much more clearly conceived and conceptualized that the end product is, I won't say better, but it's kind of more considered. So that's just one thing to think about, the use of sketches. The other thing is, people talk about composition or writing music a lot like, a lot in in its relationship to writer's block. Sorry, confusing sentence. But people are concerned with what they're going to write. Now, there's no sort of easy way around this sometimes, but I know that an improviser doesn't sit and worry about what they're going to improvise. They kind of just start improvising. The relationship between improvisation and composition is a complex one, but just leaving that aside for a moment, the idea that you were to go, what am I going to improvise about today, is something that a lot of us won't identify with. We just kind of go, okay, well, I'll improvise. To me, composition should be doing something along those lines, and in many ways it's better to build up a reserve of just ideas, and then and just leave them to one side, so you build up a kind of sketchbook of ideas, even as much as chords that you like. So I like this chord, or I might try using that little passage here, or a sort of technique, or this cool rotation technique, or 12-tone row. It doesn't matter really what it is. What really matters, or what makes a good composer or a great composer after that point, is what you do with that material. If you listen to Beethoven, for example, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony starts with actually what might be, well, I'm just going to say it, I think it's quite dull melody. That's dull to me. What Beethoven is incredible at is polishing that turd and making it into something quite incredible. And it's through the idea of development, theme and variation, really sort of honing in on what that musical element is about, and making it amazing. And I think you can look at a lot of pieces of music in that way. It's not necessarily, you don't have to come up with the most inspired melody in the world, that instantly causes tears to write a good piece. And actually you can write with things or objects that are mundane, and in the end it'll be your choices or decisions, and that's the crucial thing. It'll be your decisions about what you've done with that in terms of form, structure, harmony, rhythm, sort of rhetoric, the story that you're telling. All of those things are going to be your decisions, and that's all going to be informed by your sort of internal bank of music. So how much you've listened to, how much you've analysed, how much you've reflected upon, and how much you've written, what you've learned in that process. Compositional technique, how good is your ear? How efficient are you with your ideas, or are you going to get stuck for 2 weeks on one thing? And there's nothing wrong with that, but at some point you have to make a decision. You have to commit to ideas, and you have to go with them, and it takes a certain amount of bravery. I think bravery is the right word, to go, actually I need to try this way out. I need to try maybe to write this minute, but you have to be prepared to scrap what you come up with and write another version. And this is what goes back to what I said at the beginning of things just taking a long time in the artistic process. And no one really told me that. That was something I had to sort of work out, that actually it would take me maybe a few months to write a completed artwork. Whereas you kind of want it to be here and now. You want the instant gratification of going, okay, well that's a really great piece of music. I've done that in a day. Well done me. And then the next day you go, I hate that. And then the challenge is then to make it good, not to scrap it. So you want to come up with as many of these kind of ideas, build up a wealth of sketches, and see what sort of ends up inspiring you to create a full piece. And then the other thing I'll say is that in my experience of looking at other composers' works, I noticed that they reuse a lot of material. Many of them do. And one thing I'll say is, don't worry too much if you're reusing material from piece to piece to piece. And by reusing material, I don't mean sort of wholesale blocks, although some people do that. But what I mean is kind of the idea. Reuse that idea, maybe change it a little bit for that tempo or that harmonic structure. And interpret that as you will, but just don't worry about having to sort of reinvent the wheel every time you come to the piece of blank paper to write it. And again, it's a good composer that kind of knows or makes those decisions about what fits, what is the better note, what is the better note for this moment, what's the best rhythm. You know, there are only 12 notes, and it's kind of what you decide to put where, how you then sort of put it through the processes of, you know, is this the best voicing for this chord at this point? Is you know, is this the right sound that I'm using? Is this the right texture? All of those things are decisions that you make, and you can get decision fatigue when you're composing because you keep having to make decisions. Just something to be aware of. It's not easy, you know. You're going to sort of look at it and go, oh, is that any good? Should I do this? Should I do this? Should I do this? And what can kill an artwork is if you sit back and listen to it almost too much, rather than you know, I said at the end, you know, give it 2 weeks and then go back to it. But when you go back to it, it can be really difficult to engage in it again. You have to be prepared to tear down passages and really do what you think is right, even if, you know, you can always go back to an earlier version, but you have to be brave with your time and go, okay, well, it's not quite perfect, I'm gonna try that bit again. You know, I think it might be Leonardo da Vinci, I can't remember, but he said that you know, art is only ever abandoned, never finished, or something like that. I can't remember the exact thing that was said, but you know, I think it's a really important idea. You know, just get it to the point where you think, I can't do anything more on this, and at that point that'll be it. And fine, you can always go back and revise it 2 years later. Some composers do that, some composers don't. And the last thing I'll just say is that, you know, if you ever do find yourself with writer's block, or you need to generate material, some of the best things you can do for the most striking and original kind of ideas that you'll come up with is to use limitation exercises. And you can be as creative as you like with these. You know, limit what you're going to do to certain parameters. I will only use one note, one pitch, and then you can play with all of the other variables. It can be crippling to sort of just look at a blank page and go, oh, I don't really know what to do. It's almost always better to just do something. And by limiting the scope of what you're going to be doing, you often come up with better stuff. And again, you don't have to turn it into a full piece. You can just leave it to one side, and then you might go, oh, actually, I did come up with that one bit. That might work in this piece. And that is kind of at the sort of the professional composer level, where you're not coming up with stuff all the time. You're just sort of plundering a wealth of ideas. Okay, one last thing that I just forgot that was really helpful to me when I was working on composition. It really helps to just have a few example pieces nearby and rip stuff off. It's as simple as that. If you run out of ideas, or if you're stuck, you'll often find the answer for the right decision for your piece in other people's music. Anyway, yeah, just steal. I hope that was interesting or informative to you. If you enjoyed it, please check out my album campaign. We've had some incredibly generous contributions to it, and I'm unbelievably grateful for all of the support and help. And again, please share this video if you think it's interesting, or share the campaign details. That'd be really amazing. Anyway, look forward to tomorrow's lesson. Any ideas or any discussions or thoughts, please comment on this, and see you tomorrow. Cheers.